They branded me the ugly duckling of the graduating class, and my own family erased me from their lives. 12 years later, I walked into the ballroom of my sister's wedding, and her husband whispered, "Do you know that woman?" I swirled my champagne and replied, "More than you could ever imagine." I will never forget the blood draining from their faces when they watched me glide into Isabella Rossi's reception. It had been 12 long years since they kicked me onto the street. 12 years since the people who were supposed to love me decided I didn't meet their strict aesthetic metrics for success. The invitation had landed on my mahogany desk exactly 28 days ago. It was a heavy, cream-colored envelope with embossed gold calligraphy, screaming wealth and pretension, announcing the holy union of Isabella Rossi and Julian Sterling, heir to the city's most ruthless real estate dynasty. I held that expensive paper, feeling the phantom chill of the past wash over me. Why now? Why break the decade of silence just to flaunt their happiness when they had meticulously dismantled mine? Growing up, the roles were cast in stone. Isabella was the golden child, the genetic lottery winner with the perfect smile. I was the mistake, the girl with the thick glasses, cystic acne, and the awkward gait. "Elena, you really need to try harder," my mother would sigh, as if my bone structure was a rebellious choice I was making to spite her, rather than a mix of DNA and cruel hormones. My father, Robert Rossi, a man who treated his children like assets in a portfolio, barely acknowledged my existence at the dinner table. But the silence shattered the night I became a graduate. I was heading to the study to show them my diploma, trembling with a foolish hope for validation, when I overheard my father on the phone with a partner. "Yes, Isabella is the crown jewel," he laughed, the sound like grinding glass. "Unfortunately, the older one. Well, let's just say she's a bad investment. An ugly daughter doesn't look good on a glossy brochure." Those words didn't just hurt, they were poisoned darts aimed at my soul. The humiliation was physical, a nausea that rotted my stomach. But the next morning was worse. With swollen eyes, I confronted them. I told them I heard everything. I expected an apology, perhaps a hug. Instead, my father's face turned a shade of violent red. "You were spying? What did you expect, Elena? It's the truth. You don't fit the brand. You simply don't fit." My mother, always his silent accomplice, just looked at the floor. That night, I packed 2 suitcases and left. No one stopped me, no one called. A month later, a distant aunt whispered to me that they had quietly disowned me, modifying the family trust to ensure I received nothing. The people who raised me had legally decided I was dead to them. The years didn't just pass. They sharpened me like a blade against a whetstone. Revenge became my morning coffee and my midnight oil. It wasn't the destructive kind found in cheap movies. It was constructive, cold, and calculating. I moved 3 states away to Chicago, a city that didn't know my name or my shame. I worked double shifts at a diner while putting myself through night school for business administration, fueled by the memory of my father's rejection. Physically, the ugly duckling narrative began to crumble. The cystic acne didn't just vanish. I invested in top-tier dermatologists the moment I had my first bonus. The thick Coke bottle glasses were replaced by contacts, revealing eyes that had grown harder, more observant. My body transformed, not by magic but by 5 a.m. sessions at the gym, turning soft insecurity into lean muscle and steel determination. But the most critical metamorphosis happened internally. I stopped seeing myself as a victim of exclusion and started seeing myself as a formidable asset. I built my own empire, Phoenix Strategies, a boutique financial consulting firm specializing in corporate restructuring. The irony was delicious. My firm ended up advising several fierce competitors of my father's company. Every successful acquisition I brokered, every merger I finalized, felt like a silent, powerful message sent back home. They had decided they didn't need me, but the market did. The world did. I became a CEO at 30, celebrated in Forbes while my father was still struggling to maintain his dated image. When I decided to accept the invitation to the wedding, I didn't do it for a tearful reunion. I did it for justice. I wanted them to witness the woman I had become despite their inhumane treatment, not thanks to their support. I wanted to walk into that room and let my success be the loudest sound in the hall. I chose my armor carefully. A floor-length dress in deep crimson silk that hugged every curve of my transformed body, a color that screamed power, not submission. I wore discreet but diamond-heavy jewelry, bought with my own money, and applied makeup that highlighted the high cheekbones they once claimed were unfortunate. Upon entering the opulent hotel lobby where the ceremony was held, the air shifted. I felt eyes latch onto me, physical weights of curiosity and admiration. No one recognized the ugly Elena Rossi, but everyone was asking the same question. Who is that woman walking with the stride of a queen? The ceremony was picture perfect, exactly the kind of sterile, overpriced pageantry my family excelled at organizing. Isabella looked radiant in a Vera Wang designer gown, while Julian, her new husband, looked at her with a devotion that made my stomach twist. From my seat in the back row, obscured by the shadows of a large floral arrangement, I observed my parents. Their hair had grayed, lines of stress etched deeper into their faces, but they wore that same expression of unearned superiority I remembered so vividly. They sat there, the architects of a toxic legacy, oblivious to the storm that had just walked through the doors. The reception began, the champagne popped, and I decided it was time. I adjusted my clutch, took a deep breath, and prepared to make my official entrance into the life they had denied me. I navigated through the sea of tuxedos and designer gowns, moving like a shark gliding through a coral reef. I approached the sweetheart table where Isabella and Julian were holding court, accepting generic well wishes from distant relatives. When I finally stepped into the warm glow of the chandelier light, my sister's smile froze on her face. Her eyes widened, not with the joy of a reunion, but with recognition and pure, unadulterated panic. "Elena," she whispered, the name sounding foreign and jagged on her tongue. Julian, confused by his wife's sudden paralysis, looked at her, then up at me, squinting slightly. "Do you know her, Bella?" he asked, his brow furrowing in genuine confusion. I smiled, a sharp, dangerous curve of crimson lips that didn't quite reach my eyes. "More than you think," I replied calmly, my voice steady as steel. "I'm her older sister." "Sister?" Julian stammered, his gaze darting between Isabella's terrified face and my amused one like a spectator at a tennis match. "You never mentioned you had a sister." The color drained from Isabella's face, her eyes begging me silently to keep the family secrets buried. But behind him, I saw my parents rushing over, their faces a mask of surprise mingled with horror. My father, Robert, spoke first, forcing a smile that looked physically painful. "What an unexpected surprise. We didn't know if you would come, Elena." His voice held that controlled, clipped tone he used in boardrooms when a deal was going south. The toxic family that had erased me was now frantically trying to maintain the facade in front of their new billionaire son-in-law. "I couldn't miss my only sister's wedding, could I?" I replied, keeping my tone polite but icy. "After all, family is the most important thing. Isn't that the company motto, Dad?" I saw a muscle feather in his jaw, a telltale sign of his suppressing rage. My mother approached, hugging me mechanically, stiff as a mannequin in a store window. "You look different," she murmured, scanning me critically from my designer heels to my professional blowout. She was looking for the acne, the braces, the insecurity. She found none. 12 years can change a person," I replied, holding her gaze until she looked away. "Especially when they have to rebuild their life from the ashes of exclusion." The hint landed heavily. Julian, visibly uncomfortable, extended a hand to break the tension. "It's a pleasure, Elena. I didn't know I had a sister-in-law." "There are many truths about the Rossi family you don't know yet, Julian," I said, shaking his hand firmly, my grip confident. "Isabella, always the perfect princess, tried to salvage the sinking ship. Elena decided to follow her own path years ago," she explained quickly to her husband, her voice high and brittle. "We had differences of opinion." I laughed, a short, dry sound that cut through the noise. "Differences of opinion? That's a very elegant way to say you cast me out for not meeting your aesthetic standards. The humiliation I suffered in this family has a more precise name than differences of opinion, Isabella," I added, letting the silence hang heavy. A tense hush descended over our small circle. Guests nearby were starting to stare, sensing the friction. My father, always paranoid about public perception, intervened, his eyes hard. "This is not the time or place, Elena," he said in a low, firm voice. "It's your sister's special day." Of course, I conceded, taking a graceful step back. I wouldn't want to ruin a family celebration. I had enough of that at my own graduation. "Remember?" When you called me the ugly mistake who didn't reflect well on the business image. My father paled. He never imagined I had heard those exact words a decade ago. I don't know what you're talking about, he denied weakly, looking at Julian. I think you know perfectly well, I replied without altering my calm tone. But as you said, this is Isabella's day. Let's enjoy the party. I walked away elegantly, leaving them stunned, feeling their gazes burning into my back as I headed toward the mahogany bar. The revenge was just beginning, and it would be served cold and calculated. At the bar, a man in a charcoal bespoke suit with intelligent eyes approached. Impressive entrance, he commented, sliding a glass of vintage champagne toward me. Dominic Vance, he introduced himself, Julian's partner at the firm. Elena Rossi, I replied, accepting the glass. Related to the bride and groom? He asked with genuine interest. Isabella's older sister. The one nobody mentions, I explained with an ironic smile. Dominic observed me with curiosity. I worked with your father on some projects years ago, he commented. An interesting man. That's a diplomatic way to describe him, I replied, laughing softly. Diplomacy is my specialty, Dominic smirked. Though I sense you prefer direct honesty. Honesty cost me my place in this family, so yes, I value it quite a bit. Our conversation was interrupted by the DJ announcing the newlyweds' first dance. Everyone gathered around the dance floor while Isabella and Julian swayed to a romantic ballad. I watched my sister, perfect as always, the center of attention, the undisputed favorite. It seems there's an interesting story behind your absence in the family photos, Dominic commented, following my gaze. A story of a toxic family and impossible expectations, I replied frankly. I'd love to hear it someday, Dominic said. There was something in his look that told me it wasn't simple curiosity. Why the interest? I asked directly. Dominic hesitated a moment before responding. Let's say your father and I didn't end our business on good terms. And I suspect you might have valuable information. So I wasn't the only one with pending accounts with Robert Rossi. Interesting. The party continued, and I noticed how my parents tried to keep me away from the VIP guests, especially Julian's family. It was evident they feared what justice might look like if I opened my mouth. But I had my own plans. XI took the microphone, the cold metal biting into my palm, and smiled at the sea of expectant faces. The silence was absolute. You could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. Good evening, everyone. I began, my voice steady, projecting to the back of the room without a tremor. My name is Elena Rossi. Isabella's older sister. A collective gasp rippled through the hall like a wave. Whispers erupted instantly. Many of the guests, especially from the Sterling side, didn't even know Isabella had a sister. I saw my father make a jerk to stand up, his face a mask of fury, but my mother clamped a hand on his forearm, pulling him down. She knew that causing a scene now would only confirm whatever scandal they feared I was about to unleash. For those wondering why you've never seen me at family gatherings, I continued, locking eyes with my father, let's just say I've been building my own path, far away from here. Some distances are necessary for survival. I turned toward the head table. Isabella looked like she was going to faint. Her perfect tan seemed to turn ashen under the spotlight. Isabella, I addressed her directly. You were always the family star, the perfect child who fit the mold. Today, seeing you so radiant, I understand why you were the chosen one. I paused dramatically, letting the audience hold their breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Waiting for the venom. I wish you all the happiness in the world, I said softly, diffusing the bomb just enough to confuse them. And to you, Julian. I turned toward my new brother-in-law, whose expression was a mix of confusion and dawning horror. I wish you the wisdom to truly know the family you have just entered. May your eyes be wide open. I placed the microphone back on the stand with a definitive thud and returned to my table amidst polite, confused applause and baffled looks. I hadn't said anything explicitly offensive, but the subtext was a sledgehammer to those who needed to understand it. The air in the room had shifted from celebration to interrogation. Moments later, while waiters were serving the wedding cake, a 5-tier monstrosity, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Julian. Can we talk for a moment? He asked seriously. He didn't wait for an answer, leading me to a quiet alcove near the terrace doors, away from the prying eyes of my parents. Your speech was interesting, he commented, loosening his tie slightly as if he couldn't breathe. I was quite discreet, considering the circumstances, I replied, grabbing a fresh glass of water from a passing tray. What circumstances exactly? Julian asked, and I could see genuine curiosity warring with loyalty in his eyes. Isabella has barely mentioned your existence, and when she did, she said you had voluntarily distanced yourself due to personal differences. I weighed my options. Could I tell Julian the whole truth right here and possibly ruin my sister's wedding night? Or could I be strategic? Families are complicated, Julian, I finally replied. Let's say the standards of success and beauty in the Rossi family are inhumane. I didn't meet them, so they showed me the door. Are you telling me they kicked you out of your home? He asked, incredulous. For what? I'm telling you that you should know the family you just married into, I replied, planting the seed, especially if you plan to have children someday. Ask yourself, what happens if your child doesn't fit the Rossi brand? Julian's expression changed, the doubt took root instantly. There's something else I should know, isn't there? He insisted. At that moment, I saw Isabella approaching with the speed of a heat-seeking missile, her face a mask of alarm. The revenge was served, but the main course was still missing. Julian, honey. They're looking for you for photos with your parents, Isabella interrupted, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness but her eyes shooting daggers at me. Of course, I'm coming right away, he replied, visibly uncomfortable, pulling his arm away from her touch slightly. Elena, I'd like to continue this conversation later. Whenever you want, I replied with a serene smile. As soon as Julian walked away, Isabella dropped the facade. What do you think you're doing? She hissed, her voice trembling with rage. You come to my wedding after 12 years to ruin everything. Ruin it. I'm just having a civilized conversation with my new brother-in-law, I replied without losing my composure. Unlike you, I don't hide the truth about our toxic family dynamics. Truth? You want to talk about truth? Isabella lowered her voice, but her tone was sharp enough to cut glass. The truth is you were always jealous of me. You always wanted what I had. Her accusation made me laugh bitterly. Jealous? Isabella, I didn't want your beauty or your popularity. I just wanted a family that would accept me as I was. But I guess that was asking too much. You left, she reminded me with disdain. Nobody kicked you out. Really, rewriting history to fit your perfect victim narrative typical. I kept my voice controlled, despite feeling the fury bubbling inside me like lava. Have you told Julian how they modified the will 28 days after my departure? Or how Dad made sure no local company would hire me in the city, ensuring my total exclusion from the industry? Isabella paled slightly. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you know. I stepped closer, lowering my voice to a whisper. You were there when Dad called his partners to ruin my career before it could begin. The humiliation they planned for me was meticulous and complete. My sister looked away, confirming with her silence that my words were true. You know what, Isabella? For years I thought I hated you. That I hated this whole family for what they did to me. But now I realize I owe you gratitude. My statement surprised her. She blinked, confused. If you hadn't expelled me, I would never have discovered my own strength, I continued. I would never have built Phoenix strategies from scratch. I would never have experienced the true justice of succeeding on my own merits. Phoenix strategies? Isabella asked, and I noticed a flash of something dangerous in her eyes. Wait. The financial consulting firm? The very same, I replied, watching the realization dawn on her. We advised several companies that compete with Dad. In fact, last year we were instrumental in the acquisition that almost destroyed his Vista Skyline project. Isabella's eyes widened with recognition. That failed project had been a devastating blow to my father, a financial hemorrhage he was still trying to staunch, and now she knew I had been the surgeon holding the scalpel. That was your revenge, she murmured, horror coloring her tone. That was business, I corrected coldly. Revenge is just beginning tonight. Before Isabella could respond, a shadow fell over us. It was Dominic Vance. Sorry to interrupt this touching family reunion, he said with a smile that suggested he wasn't sorry at all, his eyes dancing with amusement. Elena, would you grant me this dance? They're playing a classic. I accepted his hand, leaving Isabella speechless, her mouth slightly ajar, creating a crack in her perfect porcelain face. As Dominic guided me onto the dance floor with expert precision, I could feel the tension radiating from the edges of the room. It seems your family reunion is becoming intense, Dominic commented, spinning me effortlessly. The air over there is thick enough to choke on. 12 years of silence and lies aren't resolved with a simple cordial conversation, I replied, glancing over his shoulder. My father seems especially disturbed by your presence. He hasn't stopped watching us since we started dancing, Dominic observed. I turned slightly to confirm his words. Indeed, Robert Rossi was watching us from the bar, his hand gripping a whiskey glass so tight I thought it might shatter. His expression was a volatile mixture of anger and deep, gnawing concern. What conflict do you have exactly with my father? I asked Dominic directly. You mentioned pending accounts. He smiled enigmatically. Let's say Robert Rossi has a particular way of doing business, one that involves appropriating others' ideas and discarding those who are no longer useful to him. His words resonated with my own experience, vibrating against the scars of my past. It seems you know my father well. I was his protégé for 3 years, Dominic revealed, his tone losing its playful edge, until I developed a proprietary real estate investment algorithm, a system that could predict market shifts before they happened. I presented it to him in confidence. A week later, he presented it as his own to the board of directors. When I confronted him, he fired me, alleging irreconcilable differences and locked me out of the system I built. Robert Rossi's specialty, I commented bitterly. Getting rid of those who don't fit his plans or who threaten his spotlight. Exactly, Dominic nodded. He thought he buried me, just like he thought he buried you. But in business, as in life, the dead have a nasty habit of rising. While we danced, weaving through the other couples, I noticed Julian watching us with intense interest from across the room. He wasn't looking at his new bride, he was looking at me, his brow furrowed in thought. The seed of doubt I had planted was growing faster than I anticipated. When the music ended, Dominic escorted me back toward my table, but before we could arrive, Julian intercepted our path. He looked flushed, his eyes bright with a new resolve. Elena, I'd like to introduce you to my parents, he said with a formality that seemed rehearsed. This unexpected invitation clearly wasn't part of my parents' carefully orchestrated plan. I saw my mother whisper something alarmed in my father's ear. Robert quickly excused himself from his interlocutors and began beelining toward us, his face a mask of panic. It will be a pleasure, I replied to Julian, deliberately ignoring my father's approach. Julian guided me toward a VIP table where an elegant, silver-haired couple was conversing with other high-profile guests. Mom, Dad, he called their attention. I want to introduce you to Elena Rossi, Isabella's older sister. Arthur Sterling, the family patriarch and a known titan in the real estate world, studied me with interest while shaking my hand. His grip was firm, his eyes assessing. I didn't know Isabella had a sister, he commented bluntly. We've known the Rossis for years. That seems to be the general consensus tonight, I replied with a smile that hit 1,000 knives. Elena has been absent from family events for a while, my father intervened, having just reached us, slightly breathless. His falsely cordial tone barely concealed his nervousness. She's always been a bit independent. 12 years to be exact, I specified, correcting the narrative instantly. Since I decided to follow my own business path. Business? Arthur asked with genuine interest, ignoring my father entirely. What do you do, Elena? Before I could answer, my father tried to divert the conversation, desperation leaking into his voice. Elena was always the rebel of the family. She preferred to abandon the family company to do other things. Artistic things, mostly. He was lying. Again. Trying to paint me as a flake. I'm the founder and CEO of Phoenix Strategies, I replied directly to Arthur, cutting my father off mid-sentence. We specialize in financial restructuring and strategic acquisitions for distressed assets. Recognition was immediate in Arthur Sterling's eyes. Phoenix Strategies? Arthur repeated, his eyes narrowing not with suspicion, but with sharp professional recognition. Wait. You advised the massive restructure of the Harrington Logistics deal last winter? We did, I replied, holding his gaze with the confidence of a seasoned CEO. It was a complex acquisition, but we managed to retain 90% of the workforce while optimizing their debt. Arthur whistled low, a sound of genuine appreciation. That was masterclass work, Elena. I read the case study in the Wall Street Journal. Your team's strategy on that merger revolutionized how we look at distressed assets in the southern market. Thank you, I replied, secretly savoring the expression of absolute consternation on my father's face. He looked like he had swallowed a lemon whole. The daughter he had deemed worthless was being praised by the man he was desperate to impress. We always seek to exceed expectations, I added smoothly. My father, sweating visibly now, tried to regain control of the spiraling situation. Yes. Well, he laughed nervously, a brittle sound. Elena was always very ambitious. Although I never imagined she would go so far without the family support or the Rossi network. Sometimes, Robert, Arthur replied, looking at my father with a steely gaze, the best talents flourish precisely because they are allowed to fly on their own. They aren't weighed down by traditional expectations. He turned back toward me, ignoring my father completely. I'd love to discuss possible collaborations, Elena. My company is considering a major expansion into commercial zoning next quarter, and it could benefit from your specific experience in consulting. It would be a pleasure, Arthur, I replied, reaching into my clutch and handing him my business card. I did it slowly, deliberately, letting my father see the gold-embossed logo of the empire I built. The humiliation I had once suffered was beginning to transform into sweet justice right in front of those who had looked down on me. The patriarch of the Sterlings, one of the country's most respected businessmen, had just validated my professional worth in front of the very family that had rejected me for not meeting their superficial standards. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, and with each word, it became clear that the power dynamic had shifted. I wasn't the exile anymore. I was a peer. When the group finally dispersed, Julian took me aside, his grip on my arm gentle but urgent. I don't understand, he said, shaking his head, looking more confused than ever. If you are this successful, if you are respected by sharks like my father, why does your family act as if you were some kind of embarrassing secret? Why did Isabella lie? It was the moment of truth. Revenge could be complete at this instant if I revealed all the cruelty of the Rossi family to their new member. Julian, I began, my voice lowering. The answer to that question could forever change the way you see your new family. Are you sure you want to know it on your wedding night? He hesitated a moment, looking over his shoulder at Isabella, who was watching us with terror from across the room. But his curiosity won out. I need to understand what I've gotten myself into, he finally replied. Please, I took a deep breath. I was disinherited and expelled from the family for a reason that will seem absurd to you. I wasn't attractive enough, according to my father's standards. What? The disbelief on his face was evident. My father built his empire based on perfect appearances, I explained, ripping the bandage off. Isabella, with her natural beauty, was always his best presentation card in society. I, with my teenage acne, braces, and ungraceful figure, was considered an embarrassment to the brand. An ugly graduate. Julian looked genuinely horrified. That's inhumane. The night of my graduation, I heard my father call me a liability. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. He told me directly that I didn't fit into his plans. A month later, I found out they had modified the will to ensure my total exclusion. I saw Julian process this information, connecting the dots, finally understanding why Isabella had never mentioned having a sister. Isabella. Was she okay with this? He finally asked, his voice hollow. Isabella has always been the perfect daughter who follows Dad's orders, I replied sadly. She never defended me. Never looked for me afterward. For them, it was easier to pretend I never existed than to face their own superficiality. Julian ran his hand through his hair, visibly disturbed. I can't believe I got married without knowing something so fundamental about my wife and her family. This isn't just a family feud, it's a moral failure. At that moment, I had a revelation. My revenge didn't consist of actively ruining Isabella's life or screaming at my parents. True justice was in reclaiming my story, my truth, and allowing natural consequences to follow their course. I didn't come here to destroy your marriage, Julian, I told him sincerely. I came to reclaim my place. To show them they couldn't destroy me. What you do with this information is your decision. Our conversation was interrupted by the announcement of the bouquet toss. All the single women congregated in the center of the dance floor, a flock of hopefuls in pastel silk. Isabella, radiant yet strained, climbed onto the small floral platform. Not joining the ritual of female desperation? Dominic asked, reappearing at my side with a fresh drink. I think I'll pass, I replied, watching the scene with detached amusement. I have a suspicion that Bouquet is programmed to avoid me at all costs. From her elevated position, Isabella scanned the crowd. When her eyes landed on me, I saw that familiar smirk, the one she wore right before she got exactly what she wanted. She turned and threw the flowers directly toward a young cousin on the Sterling side. It was one final, symbolic act of exclusion, so subtle only I could interpret the code. Even in tradition, I was the outsider. Predictable, I murmured. Does it bother you? Dominic asked. No, I replied honestly. It confirms I made the right decision building my life away from this toxic environment. The next morning, Sunday dawned with a clarity that seemed to reflect my mental state. While I drank black coffee on the terrace of my hotel suite, checking emails on my tablet, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. The revenge I had imagined had transformed into something deeper. Personal vindication. My phone buzzed. A message from Dominic. Breakfast? I have intel on the Vista Skyline project that might interest you. We met at a small artisanal cafe far from the Rossi family's usual haunts. Dominic slid a manila folder across the table. Your father didn't just manipulate contracts. There's evidence of bribes to municipal officials to expedite zoning permits. It's explosive. I examined the documents. This was the kind of evidence that could not only bankrupt the company but result in prison time. How did you get this? Let's just say I maintain contacts with other discontented employees who have meticulously documented every transgression for years, Dominic replied. Do we use it? Before I could answer, my phone rang. An unknown number. Elena Rossi, asked a clipped female voice. This is Arthur Sterling's executive assistant. Mr. Sterling requests a meeting with you this afternoon. Immediate attention required. At 3 p.m. sharp, I found myself in the Sterling Corporation boardroom. Arthur was there, looking grave. To my surprise, Julian was also present, looking like he hadn't slept in a week. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. Elena, thank you for coming, Arthur began. The situation is delicate. I cancelled the honeymoon, Julian intervened, his voice devoid of emotion. What? Why? I asked, genuinely shocked. I wanted truth, not destruction. After our talk, I confronted Isabella, Julian explained. I wanted to give her a chance to explain. Instead, she cracked. She confirmed everything you said. And more. Arthur took the floor. It turns out, Elena, that your sister wasn't just passive. She has been actively feeding your father privileged information about Sterling's upcoming acquisition targets. Information Julian shared with her in confidence. The revelation left me stunned. Isabella had not only participated in my exclusion but had betrayed her own husband to serve our father's greed. Industrial espionage, I murmured. The toxic loyalty at its peak. Precisely, Arthur nodded. And now we have a massive problem. Sensitive data is in Robert's hands. We need your help, Elena. Your inside knowledge of how your father operates, combined with your consulting expertise, could be crucial to mitigate the damage. The irony was thick enough to cut. The family that rejected me for being inadequate now faced the consequences of their own duplicity, and I, the exile, was being asked to play the savior. I need time to think, I said finally. This goes beyond business. I left the meeting with a turbulent mind. Poetic justice was undeniably sweet, but did I really want to be the instrument of their total annihilation? My phone rang again. This time, a number I hadn't seen in 12 years flashed on the screen. Mom. Elena, her voice sounded broken, almost unrecognizable. We need to talk. It's an emergency. What is it? I asked cautiously. Your father. He had a heart attack. He's in the ICU. He's asking for you. I returned to the waiting room where Isabella and my mother were sitting in a vigil of silence, looking like two statues carved from grief. I have to go, I announced, checking my watch. There are urgent matters I must attend to regarding the company. Will you come back? My mother asked, her voice trembling with a fragile hope I hadn't heard in decades. I hesitated, looking at the women who had watched me leave 12 years ago without a fight. I saw their fear, their regret, and their dependency. Yes, I promised, surprising myself. I'll come back. I stepped into the sterile corridor and dialed Dominic. What's the situation? Arthur is mobilizing. Dominic's voice was tight with urgency. He sees the truth about the espionage as a fundamental breach of contract. He wants to sue Rossi Investments into the ground. He's calling it corporate justice. But it looks a lot like total annihilation. Stall him, I commanded, walking briskly toward the exit, my heels clicking a rhythm of determination. I'm on my way. 3 hours later, I was sitting across from Arthur Sterling in his glass-walled office overlooking the city skyline. The air conditioning was humming, but the atmosphere was frigid. Elena, I wasn't expecting you, Arthur said, steepling his fingers, his face unreadable. I assume you're here to plead for your father. I'm here to propose a deal, I replied directly, placing a leather folder on his desk. One that benefits Sterling Corporation without the messy, expensive spectacle of a public trial. I'm listening. I propose a strategic merger between Phoenix Strategies, Rossi Investments Development Division, and your firm, I explained, laying out the schematics I had mentally drafted in the taxi. With my consulting firm acting as the neutral managing partner, we create a new business alliance. You get access to the Vista Skyline land rights which you've wanted for years without the legal risk or bad press of a hostile acquisition. My father retains a legacy title to save face, but he loses operational control. Arthur studied the papers, his shark-like eyes scanning the numbers. An interesting proposal. But why should I offer a second chance to a man who tried to steal from me? Because revenge is expensive, Arthur, I reasoned, leaning forward. Litigation takes years, drains resources, and spooks shareholders. A merger generates immediate value. Plus, it saves your son's marriage from being collateral damage in a corporate war. Julian doesn't need a lawsuit, he needs a resolution. Arthur paused, tapping his pen against the mahogany desk. He looked at me with newfound respect, seeing not just the sister-in-law, but a formidable equal. You prioritize innovation over destruction. I admire that. He finally extended his hand. Draft the papers. But Elena, if this is a trick. It's not, I assured him, shaking his hand firmly. It's the only sustainable way forward. My next stop was the hospital. My father was awake, propped up on pillows, looking weaker but lucid. You returned, he smiled faintly, a ghost of his former self. I told you I would. I sat down next to the bed. And I come with a proposal. I explained the merger plan in detail. As I spoke, I saw the fear in his eyes replaced by a spark of professional admiration, the look he used to reserve only for Isabella. It's brilliant, he admitted hoarsely when I finished. You save the company while stripping me of power. It's an elegant checkmate. It's not a game, Dad, I replied sternly. It's about doing business with principles. It's about integrity, something this family forgot long ago. He nodded slowly, tears forming in his eyes again. I accept. Not just to save the assets, but to take the first step in rebuilding something much more important, this family. During dinner, the seating chart confirmed my suspicions. While the Sterlings and the Rossi inner circle were seated at the platinum-decorated head table, I was relegated to table 19, near the swinging kitchen doors, surrounded by third cousins twice removed and people who were clearly filler guests. Justice seemed far away, seated next to a deaf aunt and a teenager glued to his phone, but I had brought my own plans to the table. Dominic Vance, however, ignored the seating chart entirely and pulled up a chair next to me, signaling a waiter to bring a fresh bottle of Merlot. You never finished telling me why you hate my father, I said, cutting into my filet mignon. Dominic swirled his wine, his expression darkening. Let's just say Edward Rossi has a very particular way of doing business, one that involves appropriating other people's intellectual property and discarding the creators once they are no longer useful. His words resonated with a chilling familiarity. It seems you know the Rossi playbook well. I was his protégé for 3 years, Dominic revealed, his voice dropping an octave. I developed the algorithm that identifies undervalued properties in the real estate market, the very system that made his firm millions last quarter. When I asked for my agreed-upon equity, he fired me for gross misconduct and threatened to sue if I spoke up. Edward Rossi's specialty is getting rid of anyone who doesn't fit his profit margins. Or his aesthetic standards, I commented bitterly. He discards daughters as easily as he discards partners. Then perhaps tonight is the night he pays the invoice, Dominic said, raising his glass in a silent toast. The clinking of silverware against crystal interrupted us. At the head table, my father stood up, mic in hand, his face flushed with champagne and triumph. He looked every bit the benevolent patriarch, a role he played better than any Hollywood actor. "Dear friends, family, and distinguished guests," he began, his voice trained to project warmth he didn't possess. "Today is one of the happiest days of my life. Seeing my daughter Isabella, my greatest pride, unite in marriage with Julian, it overwhelms a father's heart." He paused for dramatic effect, placing a hand over his chest. I felt bile rise in my throat. "Isabella has always been the epitome of the values we Rosses hold dear. Beauty, elegance, and dedication," he continued, his eyes sweeping over the room but deliberately skipping table 19. "In our family, we believe that excellence is not just a goal but a requirement. Today, by uniting with the Sterlings, we are not just celebrating a marriage but the union of two dynasties that share the same commitment to perfection." Every word was a calculated dart aimed at my existence. The subliminal message was loud and clear to anyone who knew the code. Isabella is everything Elena wasn't. Isabella deserves the name. Elena deserves the void. How could the man who had expelled me from his life for having acne and glasses stand there and preach about family love? How could he talk about values when his entire empire was built on shallow appearances and stolen ideas? When he finished, the room erupted in polite applause. My mother wiped a theatrical tear from her eye. The master of ceremonies stepped up to the microphone, smiling broadly. "Thank you, Mr. Rossi, for those touching words. And now, the floor is open for a brief moment. Are there any other friends or family members who wish to share a few words of truth and well wishes with the happy couple?" It was a rhetorical question. Usually, these things are scripted, but in that split second, I saw the panic flash in my parents' eyes as they looked toward table 19. They saw me shift in my chair. That fear, that raw, primal terror that their perfect facade was about to crack was exactly what I sought to provoke. Without thinking twice, I stood up. The sound of my chair scraping against the floor echoed in the sudden silence. I smoothed my red dress and began the long walk toward the microphone. I saw Isabella grip Julian's hand so hard her knuckles turned white. They didn't know what I was going to say, and that uncertainty was my first act of revenge. The private hospital where my father was interned was a sterile labyrinth of white corridors and the smell of antiseptic, the same hospital, ironically, where I had been born 32 years ago. As I walked through the aseptic hallways, the click of my heels echoing against the linoleum, I felt the crushing weight of the decision I was about to make. To forgive? To exact the final stage of revenge? Or simply to close the circle and walk away? In the VIP waiting room, I found Isabella. She looked nothing like the radiant bride from the night before. Her designer makeup was smudged, her hair pulled back in a messy knot, and her expression was one of absolute desolation. When she saw me, she stood up hesitantly, shrinking into herself as if expecting a physical blow. "She came," she whispered, addressing my mother, who was sitting in the corner like a ghost. My mother approached, looking as if she had aged a decade in a single day. Her hands trembled as she reached for mine. "Thank you for coming, Elena," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It means everything." "I haven't come for you," I clarified honestly, pulling my hands away gently but firmly. "I've come because, despite everything, he is my father. And because I need closure." Isabella looked at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. "Julian told you everything, I suppose," she murmured. "Yes," I replied simply. "Though I don't understand why, Isabella. Why betray your own husband? Why risk your own happiness for a man who treats us like commodities?" "Dad asked me to," she replied, her voice barely audible. "He said it was crucial for the company's future. That it was my duty as a daughter. And you know me. I've always fulfilled my duty. Even when that duty meant the exclusion of your own sister?" I commented without malice, just stating a cold, hard fact. Isabella began to cry silently. "I'm sorry, Elena. I really am. I was cowardly. I was selfish. I never wanted to be the heir. I just wanted to be loved." A doctor in blue scrubs interrupted, approaching our grim little group. "Miss Rossi? Your father is conscious. He has asked to see you. Only you." The hospital room was in penumbra, illuminated only by the rhythmic blinking of monitors recording my father's vital signs. Robert Rossi, the man who had always projected an image of unbreakable power, lay diminished between crisp white sheets, connected to tubes that tethered his fragile existence to this world. "Elena," he whispered upon seeing me enter. His voice, once a boom that commanded boardrooms, was now a rasp like dry leaves. "You came?" "Yes, Dad," I replied, pulling the metal chair next to his bed but not taking his hand. "I'm here." An uncomfortable silence settled between us. 12 years of absence, rejection, and humiliation don't dissipate easily, not even when facing mortality. "The doctors say I'll recover," he finally commented, staring at the ceiling. "But it's been a warning." I nodded, not knowing what to say. Part of me was still the hurt teenager desperately seeking this man's approval. Another part was the empowered CEO who had built a life despite him. "Elena," my father continued with difficulty. "What I did to you, what we did to you, was inhumane." His words surprised me. In 32 years, I had never heard Robert Rossi admit an error, much less use a word like inhumane to describe his own actions. "Why now, Dad?" I asked, my voice steady. "Is it because you're in a hospital bed? Or because I now represent a threat to your business?" My father closed his eyes momentarily, as if my skepticism caused him physical pain. "I deserve that," he admitted. "Your distrust, your resentment. I've earned it over the years." He took a deep, rattling breath before continuing. "Last night, after you left the wedding, I had an argument with Isabella. She told me about the conversation you two had, about the truth you forced her to see. And then, something in me broke. I saw what I had turned my family into. What I had become myself." His eyes, now moist, sought mine. "The pain in my chest began then, Elena, literally. My heart was breaking for what I had done. I wanted to maintain my shield, my armor of indifference, but seeing you dance with Dominic, seeing Arthur Sterling respect you, it found cracks in my defense. All my life," my father continued, "I built an empire based on appearances. Beauty. Prestige. The perfect image. It was all I valued. And in the process, I lost my eldest daughter. I lost the opportunity to know the extraordinary woman you became." A solitary tear rolled down his cheek, getting lost in the stubble on his chin. "When Arthur praised you last night, I didn't feel threat or concern. I felt pride, Elena, a pride I had no right to feel, because your achievements aren't thanks to me, but despite me." I remained silent, processing his words, searching for the manipulation I was so used to, but I found only raw, unfiltered regret. "I don't expect your forgiveness," he continued. "I just wanted you to know that I finally see clearly. I see the damage I caused. I see the injustice I committed. And I deeply regret it." I breathed deeply, trying to control the contradictory emotions invading me. "What about the information Isabella stole from Julian?" I asked, testing him. "Did you plan to use it against Sterling Corporation?" My father nodded weakly. "That was the plan. But after last night, after seeing the consequences of my actions, I told Isabella we wouldn't use it, that it was time to do business with integrity, not with industrial espionage. And she believed you?" I asked skeptically. "No," he admitted with a sad, crooked smile. "Too many years seeing me play dirty, I suppose. That's why she confessed everything to Julian this morning. She wanted to protect her husband from me. She finally chose her own family over mine." This revelation surprised me. Isabella had finally chosen honesty, breaking the pattern of toxic manipulation our father had established. "Isabella is devastated," I commented. "She fears losing Julian, and with reason. I taught her to value success and appearances above integrity," my father replied. "Now she's paying the price for my lessons." A gentle knock on the door interrupted us. It was a nurse checking the IV drip. "Excuse me, but the patient needs to rest," she announced kindly. I stood up to leave, but my father reached out and took my hand weakly. His skin felt like paper. "Elena, before you go, I want you to know I've modified the will again. I've restored your part of the inheritance, as it always should have been. Not because you need it now you're richer than I am, but because it's just." I looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of a bribe, but saw only sincere second chance seeking. "It's not about money, Dad," I replied softly. "It never was about that." "I know," he nodded. "It's about recognition. About validation. About justice." I nodded silently and left the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. The following weeks were a whirlwind of signatures and strategic restructuring. Dominic proved to be an invaluable ally, his sharp mind helping to weld the three entities together. 3 months later, the merger was officially completed. Phoenix Sterling Rossi emerged as a real estate powerhouse, innovative enough to dominate the market and sturdy enough to weather any storm. My father, fully recovered but humbled, assumed a consultative role, accepting a background position for the first time in his life. The relationship with my family continued to be a work in progress. There were no miraculous transformations overnight. Uncomfortable lunches gradually transformed into genuine conversations, and while trust was fragile, it was no longer absent. Old wounds began to heal, though the scars would remain as reminders of the toxic past we had all survived. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, I received a call from Julian. "Elena," he began without preamble. "I wanted to personally thank you. The transition has been a resounding success, and my father can't stop praising your strategic vision." "I'm glad it's working for everyone," I replied, signing the final addendum on my desk. "It's not just professional," Julian continued, his tone shifting. "It's personal, too. Isabella is changing. The couple's therapy is brutal, but it's helping. We're rebuilding on honest foundations, just like you suggested." "I'm happy for you both," I said, and for the first time, I felt the weight of resentment truly lift. "In fact," Julian added with a lighter note, "we're organizing a small dinner this Saturday. Nothing formal, just close family. Isabella insisted I invite you personally." "Close family." I repeated the phrase in my mind, savoring the irony. 12 years ago, I had been surgically removed from that inner circle. Now, I was the essential piece holding it together. "Will you come?" Julian asked. It would mean a lot to everyone. I swiveled my chair to look out the window at the city skyline, a vast expanse of possibilities. I thought about the insecure young woman I had been, the ugly graduate my father had rejected. I thought about the strong CEO I had become, capable not only of achieving success on my own but of offering a second chance to those who didn't deserve it. "Yes," I finally replied. "I'll be there." When I hung up, I looked at my desk. Next to my laptop rested Isabella's wedding invitation, now framed not as a symbol of pain, but as a reminder of the day everything changed. Beside it, a candid photo from the signing ceremony. My father, my mother, Isabella, Julian, and me. We weren't the perfect family my father had tried to project so many years ago. We were imperfect, we were wounded, and we were complicated. But we were healing. Perhaps that was the true revenge. Not destruction, but transformation. Not burning the house down, but renovating it until it fit me. I was no longer the rejected daughter seeking approval. I was Elena Rossi, a woman who had found her own path, her own voice, and finally, her own peace. Some stories aren't just entertainment. They are mirrors of the battles we fight in silence. If Elena's journey from exclusion to empowerment moved you, help us continue telling the stories that deserve to be heard. Thank you for listening, and have an excellent day.